Hello there, Sarah from 17 once again. This is my Batman Arkham Origins New Game Plus difficulty video walkthrough. This has returned to Blackgate as we are going back to the prison where it all began, chasing down the Joker to try and finally put an end to this eventful evening. But it wouldn't be so simple if it weren't filled with danger, fights, combat, and jumpsuited guys with knives, bats, electric batons, and random pieces of armor clad. Almost like the villains in Mad Max, but we can deal with them with some hefty combos and some beatdowns. And of course always prioritise the guy with the gun. So there's always an asshole with a gun, it just seems to be the way it works. But you'll notice there I lose my combo, and I lose it for one of the reasons I've been warning you not to lose it, and that is when you glue people with the semen grenade, you will knock them down regardless of what you hit them with afterwards. There is also a unique takedown you can do when you're close enough. I don't know if that's only when you're out of combat, I'm not too sure, but I've only ever seen the prompt when I was out of combat, so just bear that in mind. But there's a couple of big fights coming up in this level, because this is the last level of the game, folks. You know, you're in the final stretch here, and the last boss is simple because you've fought him pretty much verbatim in the previous mission, and then there's a kind of a novelty final encounter, and then we're done. So some might say these fights here are probably the harder parts of the game, or the harder parts of this final push, because they are more challenging than the boss fights that are coming. And that's only because there's such an ensemble of enemies that it's really easy to lose your combo, it's really easy to get hit, and the hits do stack up. But I do think that the difficulty of New Game Plus is not really that bad. Like, I unlocked I Am the Knight by beating this, and I Am the Knight is essentially New Game Plus as well, because you keep all your upgrades. The difference is when you die, it resets. But I reckon it's not going to be on that hard of a difficulty. I don't think it'll be on hard. There's a chance it might be on New Game Plus, so you don't see the counter symbols, but I think, I don't know, so don't quote me on this, and somebody's going to leave comments telling me exactly what it is, because in the future they will know, but as I speak now, the game's only just come out, and no one seems to know yet. But I reckon the counter symbols will be there. I think I Am the Knight mode is just going to be normal difficulty with permadeath. That's just a prediction. It'll be great if it isn't, because it'll give those people that really like that kind of thing an interesting challenge. Because if it's hard with permadeath, that could be tricky, because you die really fast on hard. But if you've got full life and all your upgrades, much less so. I don't know. I don't think that difficulty sounds like a difficulty. I think it just sounds like an inconvenience. And I talk about this quite a lot in games. Oh, I say games, in my guides, sorry. Because I do generally hardest difficulty walkthroughs. But I know for a fact that there are people who are going to believe that I Am the Knight is the hardest difficulty, even if it isn't. It might be the hardest, I don't know. From my gut feeling of what I've played of this game, I think hard is harder than New Game Plus. It's simply a case of numbers. You do a new game on hard, you have nothing, and you're earning it. And while you're earning it, the struggle is there, because you have the lowest life, you have the less amount of abilities to hit things with. It makes it a more challenging encounter. But New Game Plus, sure, you can't see the counter indicators, and it is challenging, and there's all the different enemies, and there's all the really annoying setups, but you've still got a full life bar, and you've still got access to things you wouldn't have on the New Game Hard. So just right there immediately, New Game Plus is promoted as being the tougher difficulty when in fact it isn't. And I Am the Knight might be the exact same way. I just haven't checked it. And I'm very sensitive to game design when it comes to difficulty balance, because it's something that I'm passionate about. And when I'm passionate about something, I analyse it as best as I can. And I look as closely at it as it can be looked. And there are a lot of games that handle difficulty expertly. Fantastic games that handle difficulty well. An example of this, Devil May Cry's, Ninja Gaiden's, God of War's. You know, I think the exceptional ones are the early Devil May Cry's. Metal Gear Rising, Platinum do a good job of the hard difficulties, because they make them really hard. There's no other way to say it. You know, if anybody have ever played Vanquish, you'll know the hardest difficulty on that game is sadomasochistic. But if you beat it, it probably feels really, really good, and it's something that's on my bucket list. Like Bayonetta's an interesting one because a lot of people think the hardest difficulty on that is only hard because there's no witch time. But that is people grossly misunderstanding that difficulty. Infinite Climax mode, not having witch time is the beginning of the hell that is that playthrough. The enemies themselves have different behaviour, and that behaviour is what makes it scary. And people are too busy noticing they don't have witch time to notice that the enemies now have the ability to tank and recover through your attacks, which they didn't have before because you had the luxury of hitting them in witch time, which was an indefinite stun. You know, people don't realise that that game is so much harder on Infinite Climax than on any other difficulty, and it's not because of semantic, it's just because it is. Bayonetta at full speed is one of the fastest and most demanding on reflexes of any game you'll ever play. It's insane. And I do have something planned for that game, but I doubt I'll ever get to it, so I'm not going to promise anything or tell you what it is, I'll just let you wonder. But the reason why I say Devil May Cry is the best example, I'll always go back to the same one, Devil May Cry 1. The finest action game ever made for its time. The father, the pioneer of the genre that I love so much, that when I listen to people who like this genre say they have never played it, to me is like saying they're a painter and they've never seen, you know, Leonardo DiCaprio's work, or they're an artist and, you know, they've never been near any other artist's work, because it's just this insanity of reason. It doesn't make any sense. Devil May Cry is where it started. Devil May Cry is where it began for most. There will be examples of games that used elements similar to this before it, but as far as a cohesive package of just what makes these games great, the first one, Devil May Cry, is the best, by far. Every other game from them has copied it in some way and would not exist if it were not for that game. Anybody who denies that doesn't know their history of gaming. It's just that simple. That is fact, that, guys. That's not opinion. If you don't like Devil May Cry 1, that is fine. I'm not talking about opinion. I'm talking about just the chronological order of how these games were made and how the influences from them speared a generation of a genre. But on the original Devil May Cry, and I've mentioned this before in videos, I do apologise, I've talked over like 2,500 videos, I say a lot of things. There are enemies you do not even meet until you played hard difficulty. Enemies that don't even exist in the game until you play on hard. So when you get to a certain area and you know what's coming next, you have no idea what's coming next. And the thing that does come is something you've never even seen. And you know the coolest thing about that? Is the enemy itself is one of the coolest enemies in the game. And I'm talking about an enemy called a Frost, which you don't see this enemy on normal, you barely see it. But as soon as you turn it onto hard, there it is. Bosses have difficulty-specific attacks and difficulty-specific patterns that they don't ever use unless they're on the harder difficulties. Bosses that are so interesting and detailed that they put bosses that are released nowadays to shame. Completely to shame, because they were so interesting and so well designed and so nuanced. Good example of this is a boss called Nightmare, Nightmare is a boss that is hated because people don't understand the fight. But Nightmare is so simple to control when you understand how he works. It is literally a science, and it's a science that can be predicted. It's beautiful, it's art, it really is, it's something else. I'm a massive fanboy for Devil May Cry 1 because I never played anything like it, and it spearfronted the generation of games that is one of my favourite genres. It's just absolutely sublime, and it is difficulty done well. Difficulty done superbly. You know, they are the masters of doing it, and that's the reason why I am such a big fan of Platinum. And it always makes me laugh when people say they really like Devil May Cry, but they don't like Platinum. Because that's like saying, you know, I really like Rocksteady, but I don't like Batman. Because people don't seem to realise that the people who essentially funded and became Platinum are the people who made these amazing games. The creative director on Devil May Cry, the creative director on Resident Evil 2. You know, this guy is a legend. And I think his name is Hideki Kamiya. An absolute legend of innovation in game design. He was one of the founders, and he is the creative director at Platinum. He's the person who was the creative director on Bayonetta. So to say that, you know, you like Devil May Cry, especially if you like the first one, but you don't like Bayonetta, is pissing in your own bed. And don't get me wrong, that's just an observation. If you don't like the game for how it plays and things, that's just an opinion. Once again, that's just you not liking the game. But for all intents and purposes, you're disliking a game that is a spiritual successor to Devil May Cry, and that's literally what it is. And these people make fantastic games, and they make fantastic difficulties because they understand how difficulty works. And that's my phone, which always goes off during a commentary. And it's too far away to stop it, guys, so I do apologise. Anybody wondering, that is a song by Funeral off a beautiful album called From These Wounds, which, if you're not into doom metal, you'll probably hate, but if you enjoy the melancholy edge to one of the subgenres of metal, it's a fantastic album that I recommend. But there is no right way to do difficulty, guys. But there are wrong ways to do it. And to bring this thing full circle, I think this obsession with permadeath is the laziest and most backward-ass direction gaming could ever go towards. And I understand why we're doing it, because it's a nostalgia trip and it's easy. It's easy to do that. Here's the same version of the game, but when you die, we delete your save. There's your challenge. There you go. Human error in itself will kill your save file. Enjoy. That is not difficulty. It's not. That's just bullshit. There are no words. I can't articulate what that is, but it's not difficulty. And why do I say it's backward-assed? Because that's what arcade games were. You put your quarter in, or your 50 pence in, or your 20 pence in, however much it was, depending on the era that you played, and you played till you died, and then when you died you went back to the beginning. You know? When you had your NES, when you had your Mega Drive, when you had your SNES, these things did not have memory cards. SNES might have had one. Might have had games that stored it on cartridge, but I can tell you one thing that didn't, and that is the Mega Drive. When you turned it off, you were at the beginning of the game. Every time. And if you wanted to beat it, you better sit on your ass and get it done, or it's not happening, because you're going to have to start all over again tomorrow. That's how games were. One of the ways they tried to counterbalance this was by giving you cheat codes. They would give you level codes, so you would put in a code and you'd get back to the level where you were, because they didn't have the technology to allow you to save that state. So all that's happening with this permadeath nonsense is we're going back to the days when the technology wouldn't support a save. And there's a bunch of people that are thinking like, oh yeah, it reminds me of my childhood when I used to, you know, go for broke on one credit. Which is all good and well, but there are games that do that perfectly. There are games designed to do that. There are older games that you can go back and enjoy. Newer games aren't designed the same way, and it doesn't suit them. You know, Dead Space is a fantastic example of this. Dead Space is not hard. It's not. You know, Dead Space 2, Dead Space 3, they're not difficult games. But what is difficult is keeping your composure when you know that enemies that can insta-kill you, regardless of what you do if you make that mistake, will result in the end of your game. And the anxiety and the stress of that is the difficulty. That is literally it. It's the stress of just human nature. I don't think that's fun. And I've got hardcore achievement on Dead Space 2. You know, I did it in 2 sittings. And I hated every moment of it, because I just didn't think it was fun. I've started my hardcore playthrough on Dead Space 3. I've also found a way to exploit the save so that I'm pretty much guaranteed to not ever have any fear to die, but I'm on chapter 7, and I haven't died, and I don't think I will because that game is easy. Darksiders had it. Why the fuck would Darksiders have it? one of the longest, most drawn out, most copy pasted dungeon after dungeon sequence of events in Darksiders 2. A permadeath mode in a game where the strategy and the combat was bash until you win. That doesn't even make any sense. But that is the end of the video, guys. I'll try and bring it back onto topic on the next few, because there's not many left and we are approaching quite steadily the end of this guide. So thank you for watching, and you take care now.